Hi, today is day 10 of me reading to improve my pronunciation and enunciation and the way I articulate, and also improve how I structure my thoughts and into words. So, I'll be continuing off where I've started with section 3, implementing the systemic bypass in real time from step 3. Step 3, building an alternative that does not depend on the system. A bypass is only successful if the new reality does not require interaction with the old system. If the alternative path still references the system in any way, the bypass is incomplete. To ensure a full bypass, the new structure must be self-sustaining. It must not require approval, validation, or fallback access to the old system. It must feel as natural and real as the system you left behind. Examples: employment bypass, income that is not based on effort exchange or corporate validation. Education bypass, authority and credibility based on direct impact rather than institutional credentials. Social approval bypass, self-worth that is internally structured rather than an independent on external validation. If you're still mentally referencing the old system to define your success, you have not bypassed it. Step 4, collapse residual attachments to the system. Many people believe they have bypassed the system when they have only left it physically, not emotionally or mentally. A system still has control over you a system still has control over you if you think about it constantly, even after leaving. You feel the need to prove that leaving was the right choice. You still use it as a reference point for measuring success. True bypass is not leaving a system, it is dissolving its influence over your perception. To collapse residual attachments, to stop engaging in mental comparison between the old system and the new path. Release the need to be right about leaving. Shift identity fully into the new structure rather than just defining yourself what you have left behind. A bypass is only complete when the system no longer holds any weight in your internal or external reality. Step 5, test for full systemic detachment. A simple test to determine whether a bypass is complete. Does the system feel distant and irrelevant as an outdated technology? Would it make no difference to you if the system changed, collapsed, or remained the same? Does success in your new structure feel natural rather than something you are getting away with? When a bypass is fully integrated, the system no longer exists as a point of reference. You do not feel the need to justify your choices, convince others, or engage in proving anything. The old system becomes as meaningless to you as an obsolete tradition you've never subscribed to. If the system still affects your thoughts, emotions, or sense of self, further detachment is needed. Systemic bypass is not about rejecting or opposing a system, it's about removing it from your reality entirely, creating a structure so solid that the original system no longer exists as a point of influence. Structural override, the next level of reality creation. For many, systemic bypass is enough. Stepping outside of a system and making it irrelevant allows for a life free from its constraints. However, some people are not satisfied with personal escape. They want to change the system itself. They do not simply want to remove their own dependency on it, they want to render the old structure obsolete. This is where structural override comes in. Structural override is not about rejecting or resisting a system. It is about imposing a new governing directive that forces the system to reorganize itself. Instead of negotiating with reality or opting out of dysfunctional frameworks, it, it displaces an existing structure with an alternative so complete that the original framework can no longer operate the same way for anyone. This is the difference between choosing freedom for yourself and imposing a new reality where the previous structure collapses entirely. Structural override versus systemic bypass. Systemic bypass removes the need for a system at an individual level. You step out of its influence and no longer engage with its rules. However, the system still exists for those who continue participating in it. Key differences. Systemic bypass creates an independent alternative that exists alongside the system. Structural override forces the system itself to reorganize and operate differently. Systemic bypass allows individual to exit a framework, but the framework still functions for others. Structural override changes the framework so that it no longer functions in its original form for anyone. Many people mistake systemic bypass for a structural override because their personal reality changes. However, systemic bypass does not restructure reality itself, it only allows the individual to function outside of the existing system. Examples of structural override in contrast with systemic bypass. Wealth and employment. Systemic bypass. I no longer need traditional employment and have built an alternative structure. Structural override. I have changed how income generation works at a systemic level, so people no longer need employment for financial stability. Education and authority. Systemic bypass. I no longer need credentials, so they don't matter in my reality. Structural override. The educational system itself has shifted so that credentials no longer determine authority at all. Social validation and influence. Systemic bypass. I no longer seek approval from external institutions, so their validation is meaningless to me. Structural override. Social approval structures no longer function the same way for anyone. Authority and credibility are now determined by different metrics entirely. Healthcare and healing. Systemic bypass. I have removed myself from pharmaceutical system and no longer requires its solution. Structural override. The mainstream medical system now recognizes alternative modalities as the dominant form of treatment, shifting the entire industry's foundation. Legal and governance structures. Systemic bypass. I live in a way that is unaffected by restrictive legal policies. Structural override. The legal framework has been rewritten so that these restrictions no longer apply to anyone. Each of these examples show the differences between creating a path for yourself versus imposing a new directive to a systemic level that reshapes reality itself. Where structural override ends and full authorship begins. Structural override forces a system to reorganize, but it still interacts with the existing framework. Even though it replaces the old function with the new one, it is still working within a larger systemic reality. This is where structural override differs from full authorship. Structural override modifies an existing system by forcing a new structure into operation. Full authorship creates a governing law from nothing. It is not interacting with the old system at all. Structural override is still playing within the game, even if it is rewriting the rules. Full authorship is creating an entirely new foundation. Most people who believe they are engaging in structural override are actually still bypassing a system, and most who believe they are authoring reality are actually just overriding a system at scale rather than creating a new governing law. The mechanics of structural override. Successfully executing a structural override involves more than just imposing a new directive. It requires a precise understanding of the mechanics that will ensure that the new directive replaces the old one. This section will walk you through essential steps to not only execute an override but also ensure its lasting effectiveness. This process is broken down into 4 key components. First, identifying the core directive of the existing system. 2. Disrupting the system's dependency on its core directive. 3. Imposing the new structured directive. 4. Ensuring the override becomes self-sustaining. Let's break down each of these components in more detail. 1. Identifying the core directive of the existing system. Every system is built upon a core directive, a fundamental rule, or a governing law that underpins how the system operates. To successfully override a system, it is essential to identify this core directive. The core directive can be recognized by the following characteristics. It is the principle that governs the functionality of the system, how the system operates at the most basic level. It dictates the behavior of all the participants within the system. It is often taken for granted or accepted as an unquestioned truth by those within the system. By identifying the core directive, you can understand what keeps the system in place and what needs to be displaced in order to effect meaningful change. Example: if you are attempting to override the education system, the core directive might be credentials determine a person's authority and legitimacy in society. In this case, to override the system, you would need to replace the core directive with new frameworks such as knowledge and wisdom determines a person's authority and legitimacy, not formal credentials. 2. Disrupting the system's dependency on its core directive. Once you have identified the core directive, the next step is to disrupt the system's reliance on it. This involves disrupting the foundation that supports the entire system. If the system is reliant on a collective belief or a structure, that belief must be questioned or rendered absolute. Recognition and removal. The system can only be overridden if the core directive is no longer upheld by collective participation. Disruption. To disrupt this core directive, you must initiate a shift in collective consciousness, causing the structure that relies on it to become unsustainable. Example: if the current system's directive is that the work equals money, you might disrupt it by showing through action that wealth generation does not require traditional employment. This will cause others to question the current structure, creating an opening for the override. Disrupting the system's core directive requires creating doubt or rendering it irrelevant by demonstrating the current system no longer serves its purpose, or is it not only valid way to achieve success. 3. Imposing the new structural directive. Now that the old directive has been disrupted, the next step is to impose the new structural directive. This is the phase where you actively replace the old system with a new framework that will become the new baseline for reality. Clarity and confidence. The new directive must be clear, absolute, and so compelling that forces the system to reorganize around it. It should leave no room for doubt for resistance. Systemic integration. The new directive must integrate seamlessly into the system. This is where you begin to shape the entire environment around the new belief or function. Example: once you have demonstrated that wealth does not require traditional employment, the new directive might be abundance can be accessed through creation, value exchange, and community support, not just through formal employment or hierarchy structures. This creates a new framework where success does not rely on an old structure, and the new directive becomes the foundation of all future actions. The new directive must be embraced by the system, not just by individuals, but at all levels, so that it becomes the dominant force in shaping the structure of reality. 4. Ensuring the override becomes self-sustaining. For a structural override to truly take hold, the new directive must be self-sustaining. This means the new structure should continue to operate and reinforce itself even after the initial action has been taken. Self-reinforcing. The new directive must be integrated into the system to the point where it begins to reinforce itself. Once in place, the system should naturally adjust around it, ensuring it does not revert back to the old structure. Autonomous continuity. The override must be a part of the normal functioning of reality so that it does not require constant intervention to stay in place. It should be so undeniable that it becomes the natural state of the system. Example: as people increasingly abandon the traditional employment system for alternative models, this new way of generating income becomes the new standard. Eventually, the old system no longer exists because the new framework has been fully absorbed and integrated into collective behavior. To ensure that the override remains in place, you must embed the new structure deeply into existing system's function, so that once it has replaced the old system, there is no longer any viable space for the old structure to regenerate. The challenges of structural override, why most attempts fail and how to ensure success. The challenges of a structural override. I think we're gonna read this tomorrow. The weather is beautiful. I don't know if it's raining or it's just my. Okay.